23.
Thank you.
You got it?
I do, okay. Took me a while to find it, but I have it stashed.
So next week at 9 o'clock?
Is that right?
Yes,
our
next
early
week
one?
is 9 o'clock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you're joining us online, next week, January 9th, we're going to meet at 9 because there's some programming I have to take care of here at Temple. Thanks.
Okay.
Let's get right in. We're on page 312. Are we early?
No.
You're right on time.
Right on time.
You're right there.
So we're getting close to the end of our understanding of what the short long path is. So just to recap, we first learned about a different kind of love than the one we were talking about in our first system of meditation, when we were creating love intellectually and fear. And this love was called the ava misoteric, the hidden love. We understand it's hidden sometimes beneath the consciousness of every one of us, and yet it's triggered, it emerges when we're faced with a situation where we definitely know we'll be cut off from God as a Jew, and then we've seen through history this love emerges. So now the author is saying, how can we take this and use this in normal everyday life, in traffic, in decisions, in family, in conversations? Because there, it's not obvious that I'm being disconnected from God, it's just normal life. Can I have the same high-functioning state whenever I choose to? Can I model that in just normal life situations? And the key to that was in looking at divine unity and idol worship, because that's what normally triggers this ava misoteric, this hidden love to emerge. Is if I'm faced with really cutting myself off from divine unity, or I'm forced to worship an idol, God forbid, then suddenly, boom, I'm in this high-functioning state where I would, in fact, give up anything to not be separated from God. So how can we model that? So now we're re-examining what divine unity means and what idol worship means. And divine unity doesn't mean there's just one God. As we've seen in the past few chapters, it means there's no one else here but God. There's no other being. There's no other influence. There's no other entity. There's only God. And even in fact, we said we saw God's speech that creates the world is also non-existent. So from this perspective, divine unity means the world is not there, divine speech is not there, these other forces in the universe are not really influences. The whole thing is just God alone, as God was before creation. Which is a lot to get into our mind. That's a thing that you have to reinforce again and again. But if you reinforce it, it becomes more and more of your reality. And then suddenly, this next step becomes easier, which is, okay, what is idol worship? It's not just me bowing down to some stone idol. Idol worship is denying that God is the only being. And in particular, insisting that I am a being and I have influence and I can decide what I want, despite clearly what Judaism would want of me at this moment. So when I'm faced with that moment where I say, do I come to temple and go to services, or I just go to movie with my friends, it feels to me like I'm just having a social tension in myself, and what's the big deal? I can do one or the other, I'll go back next week. But in fact, what I'm doing is I'm saying, no, this Friday night, I exist, I'm making my decision, I'm not going to services, which is what Judaism wants. I'm actually going to go to a movie for myself, and now I've created that idol. The idol is me, and I'm saying, my turn, I get to decide. And when I've created that idol, now I've created something else. And I've stepped away from that divine unity. And if we take that as our model of idol worship, we see that idol worship is a very, very subtle thing. It doesn't mean denying God exists. It means really giving anything else true influence, especially my own ego. So that's the divine unity part. That's also the idol worship part. And the more we, again, reinforce that, we can make that a reality, the more we can actually seize this really innate trigger of love that's within us to then bring that to bear on any situation we'd like. So in this past chapter, this is a lovely chapter. I really feel inspired by it, because here we're talking about, we're zooming in on the divine unity part, and we're really seeing in profound ways how any mitzvah we do here at temple, any Torah learning we do anywhere, that really has such a high level of divine unity that it goes beyond even the sense of oneness we have with God in the spiritual realms. It goes so far beyond that. And the reason is, because when we say the world doesn't exist, we don't just mean the physical world, we mean all the worlds. For Kabbalah, a world, an olam, is just a state of how much godliness is hidden from, as we said, hiddenness. So olam is related to hiddenness. It's just levels of how much God is hidden. And all these spiritual worlds, no matter how high one could possibly elevate, they're all just worlds, and they're all just non-existent. So we're not looking at finding divine oneness by having spiritually elevated moments, because that's all just included in the world. That's all just not there. We're looking at getting divine oneness by how the Alter Rebbe started this chapter from the Zohar, where it says, God and the Torah are completely one. God and the Torah are completely one. Welcome, Joey. Okay, I'll share the event you had this week for a moment.
Sure.
So Joey had a yard site for his wife Linda, and so perhaps we dedicate our learning today to Linda's soul. She should have an aliyah, and many, many more.
Thank you, Ken.
You're
Very
welcome.
sweet. Did you also share today, special day in Hasidus? Did you share that?
Yeah, there's a lot of special days. We share the today's special day. Books, and there was a lawsuit, and there was,
Right.
yeah, I don't
The
know,
books.
it's a long
We
story.
can talk
but,
about it later.
Yeah,
Okay.
if you want to stay after class, we can talk about hay tables, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry. I didn't mean to be
All good. So the Alter Rebbe said, the Torah and God are completely one. Completely one. So that, in one line, discounts any unity we could experience in the spiritual realm. I know that when we have spiritual experiences, and likely most of us have had those moments in life, where the goggles come off and sort of illusion of the physical world is gone, and we just sense this total oneness. It's amazing, it's beautiful, we bring it back into life and it's inspiring, but that's just a journey, a peek into the spiritual worlds. Those worlds also don't exist. And so if I'm aiming to get spiritual oneness by modeling those spiritual experiences and going higher and higher into that, that's the Eastern model. The Eastern model says, okay, the physical world is an illusion, doesn't exist, so detach from it and just remain as high as you can in the spiritual worlds, and that's the answer, right? That's nirvana, that's enlightenment. The Alter Rebbe looks at it and says, it's just another world. What, you think spiritual oneness of the higher worlds, that's godliness? You think that's God? No. God and the Torah are one. And those spiritual worlds also don't exist. So, although it's wonderful to have spiritual experiences, we may actually create the same dynamic of quote-unquote idol worship in a subtle kind. Because here I am, I'm having spiritual experiences, I want to share them, I want to teach, I know so much more. It's very easy, I'm sure we've all seen, that someone who has very spiritual capacities can just do idol worship in that spiritual world. And they haven't gotten away from anything. They're just enjoying it in a different way, perhaps. So the Alter Rebbe says, idol worship is any acknowledgement that there's any influence other than God, period, whether it's in the physical or the spiritual. And then we describe this oneness, where when we're actually having oneness with God through the Torah and God being one, that's nothing to do with the spiritual world. That can be right here in the physical world. Because to God, the highest spiritual world, the lowest physical world, they're all the same place. They're all non-existent. So for Jews, we experience total oneness with God when we're in the physical world, giving food to someone, as we said many times, or lighting Hanukkah candles as we did, physical Hanukkah candles with a physical flame. We get total oneness with God that has nothing to do with how spiritual or physical my conscious experience is being. You get where I'm going? Yeah? So it's an important distinction to make. Many seekers, they look to the spiritual as the place where they're going to find God and find oneness with God. And the Alter Rebbe says, that's very nice if you experience it, but it's just a world. So make sure you understand there's nothing there either. It doesn't exist. The important thing is, whether you're in the spiritual or physical, understanding that Torah and mitzvahs give us oneness with God's essence, God's actual self, not just some spiritual world that God is speaking, which isn't there. Yeah. And speaking of speaking, I may have spoken too much there. Let's get back to our text. So we looked at several types of oneness. We'll get back to this chapter. there is the oneness of a chariot with its rider, and that's the oneness the Alter Rebbe describes our limbs, our actual physical body experiences. So you're shaking that lulav netra, and your hands are like a chariot to what we're describing, the divine will of that mitzvah. And any mitzvah you do, you can make that your reality, that when you're speaking, when you're walking, when you're acting, your physical body is a chariot to ratzon of Atzilus called, to divine will. Second level was the life force and the garments of my soul. So not the physical limbs, but the actual garment of action, garment of speech, the life force behind that. That had the unity of a body with a soul. That's a higher level of unity. As we said, a chariot is still separate from the driver, but a body and soul, they're much more a state of oneness. But now we just got to moving from talking about mitzvahs to talking about Torah study, and here we experience a third level of oneness, and that is the oneness of Torah with God. They're totally one, they're completely one. And that goes beyond the oneness of the soul of the body, because the soul is still filling the body, is still a different entity in the body in a very subtle way to us, but it's there. Torah and God are completely one, so it has a higher level of oneness than even the soul of the body or a Merkava chariot. And so although most of us don't experience it consciously, because we're working through a physical brain here, when we learn Torah, we're actually experiencing that third level of unity of, as the Zohar says, the Torah and God are completely one. And that's filling us, that's surrounding us, and we're going to look deeper into what that is. And this is really the inspiration that we draw from this from this short long path, which is, since there's nothing else here, then the only way I can get unity with God is actually through our channel, through Torah mitzvahs, and Torah is really the highest form of unity.
So Torah, are you meaning Tanakh?
Yes, as you'll see, he spreads it out to the oral tradition and everything. So let's start 2 paragraphs earlier than where we stopped.
We did it where the thing called Sefirot.
Yeah, so let's go back to
Let's
paragraph.
go back to.
כי רצון העליון הוא הדבר הלכה עצמה, שמההר מדבר בו שכל ההלכות הן קולטי המשכות, אם רצון העליון עצמו.
For the divine will is identical with the halakhic subject of which one thinks and speaks, inasmuch as all the laws of the halakha are particular expressions of the innermost divine will itself. For God willed it thus, that a particular thing be deemed permissible or kosher, or that this person be found exempt and another innocent, or the reverse.
We read that last week. So when I'm thinking about as we said, any topic in the Torah, any legal topic, I think I'm thinking about some legal code, but I'm actually thinking what God was thinking. Right? God was thinking, I wonder if, some crazy thing happened, I wonder what the legal ramifications would be. And of course, I'm imagining God thinking like a human. It's nothing like that. God's first thought encompassed all possibility of all creation. So obviously my thought and God's thought are the same. But nevertheless, what I can grasp in my mind, that's actually now God's thought. And I'm experiencing unity with that. So if I want to grow up and be a Jewish judge in an Orthodox court, then I need to learn the halachot that are practical, that will apply to a city, and people will come to me and I'll have to make rulings, and then I need to look at it practically. But 90-something% of Jews that are learning Torah are learning it for this reason. Not because they will ever have to make a legal ruling, but because they want to be close to the thought process of God. And of course, they'd like their physical actions to correspond to that. They want to know how to live life. But most of the Torah that you learn is not something you encounter in life, and you have to make a decision, even in the traditional world. Right? So that's the essence. That's why people want to learn so much, is that sense of unity. At the bottom of the page, וכן כל צורפי אותיות תורה נביאים כתובים הן המשכת רצונו וחוכמתו המיוחדות באין סוף ברוך הוא ותכלית הייחוד שהוא יודע והוא המדע.
Similarly, is that where we are?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So you skipped one. Similarly, all the letters combined of the
Pentateuch.
Pentateuch, prophets, and the writings are also expressions of God's will and wisdom, which are united with the blessed Ein Sof in the perfect unity, since he is the knower, the knowledge, and the known.
So this zip file that came down on Sinai, which we call Torah, it had the actual Torah received at that point, and also had everything else, because it comes from above creation, above time. So it had all this potential intellect that was hidden in that point of Chokhmah that came down. And the process of Bina, of history, is us unraveling what that zip file was at Sinai, and that includes even the halachic rulings that are being made today, and certainly the writings that the great sages throughout history made, and certainly the Talmud of the Gemara, and certainly also the prophets that followed after the 5 books of Moses. So what came down at Sinai, that was a point of Chokhmah. We can't possibly have understood all the ramifications. It was even just the ones that we later pulled out of history. It's just so tremendous. That's the process of Bina, eventually pulling the details out of it. But it was all contained in it. It was all part of it. So in terms of divine unity, whether I'm studying something from the prophets or studying something from the Torah itself, or even studying something from Hasidus or Musar, any of the texts that are accepted as part of the Torah in this widest sense, I'm still experiencing this sense of unity. It's not just, it has to be a Torah scroll in the 5 books of Moses. And here he brings up what we learned in the earlier chapters, that God is the knowledge, knower, and known, not in the way we experience it, where they're 3 separate entities, but that with God, it's all one thing. So, I'm just looking at God's knowledge, God's intellect. That's not God, that's just God's intellect. Wrong. For a human, that'd be the case. Right? If I read some great book on math that some great mathematician has written, I'm reading that person's intellect, and it's separate. I can hold it in a book. But with God, there is no division, as we learned long ago. And so just because I'm learning God's intellect, that doesn't mean that's separate from God. God is the knowledge, knower, and known. And when you learn God's intellect, you get unity with God's essence. And let's skip this note. It's a nice metaphor. וזה שכתוב דאורייתא וקודשא בריך הוא כול אחד, ולא איברים דמלכא לחוד כפי קודים.
I can't.
Oh, sure.
Okay, where are we?
This is what is meant. Bottom of 313.
13, okay. Thus, when one studies...
The bottom, let's do the bold. This is what is meant.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is what is meant.
Way at the bottom, in the bold writing. On the right?
Here. Oh,
There you go.
this is what is meant by the statement that the Torah and God are absolutely one. They are not merely organs of the king, as are the mitzvot.
Right, so remember earlier in the chapter he said the mitzvahs are the 613 organs of the king. Right, so if you're picturing God having a body, which you're not supposed to do, it's not a physical body, it's 613 organs, and those organs are the Torah's commandments. So if you learn the commandments, you're sort of encountering the body of the king. When you do them, you're becoming a chariot or a soul and a body unity. You're flowing with all that. And then that seems like such a lofty unity, but here we're saying, well, Torah is completely one with God, not just like the organs. Right? So while the mitzvot give us this one level of unity, learning Torah, that's the total, absolute unity. 314. ומאחר שרצון העליון המיוחד באמצע כרוך הוא בתכלי הייחוד ובגילוי לגמרי ולא בהסתר פנים כלל וכלל בנפש האלוקית ולבושיה הפנימיים שהם מחשבתה ודיבורה באותה שעה שהאדם עוסק בדברי תורה.
Now, since the divine will, which is in perfect unity with God himself, stands completely revealed in the divine soul and in its inner garments. For example, its thought, speech, and action. Thought and speech. While a person occupies himself with words of Torah, and there is nothing obscuring the divine will at that time. For when one studies Torah, the divine will and wisdom contained in it come into full expression in one's soul and its faculties of thought and speech.
So this is how we become a part of that divine unity. Right? Because the whole point is if something is nullified to God, then it's unified to God. Remember we talked about all that tzimtzum, and that's how we experience the physical world as being separate, and that's how entities think they can be separate, because God conceals the divine light that's flowing, but it's like the shell of a snail. It's still part of God. And from God's perspective, nothing is separate. So when we nullify ourselves to that reality, now we become part of that oneness again. And the more you consciously do it, the more that can happen. And the best way to do that is, as we're saying now, by Torah study. Because I can meditate and say, I'm not here, I'm not here, I'm here, and maybe that will influence my reality. But ultimately, if I just take something that's important to me in Judaism and engage with that, with this model, with this lens, that is actually a channel to experience total oneness with the essence of the Ein Sof, that nullifies us to God, and we just become part of that unity. As I say later, you may not consciously experience it. You may get a glimmer, a glimpse, an inner sense of knowing, but you'll still feel like you're a separate person sitting and learning Torah, but your soul experiences it. And we get, there's a communication. We get through the broken telephone, we get little somethings from our soul that kind of give us an inner sense of knowing, even if we're not the kind of person that can see the spiritual realities of what our soul is experiencing, the bulk of our soul, which is above consciousness. So this is how we do it. We nullify ourselves by acknowledging divine intellect is the same as divinity. The Torah and God are one. When we learn it, boom, our soul is now one with God and we're nullified. And we can do that in the spiritual world or in the physical world. You don't have to go anywhere. הרי גם הנפש ולבושיה אלו מיוחדים ממש באין סוף ברוך הוא באותה שעה בתכלית הייחוד.
With a unity comparable to that of God's
No, it
speech.
follows.
I'm sorry. It follows that at that time the soul and these garments of thought and speech are also truly united with God.
I know I talk too long when somebody goes to the next paragraph. That's a good barometer.
Did he ever talk about how when you encounter difficult parts in the Torah?
He doesn't. We've talked about it. So
Like the book of Judges.
Yeah, so the question is, what about the difficult parts in the Torah? We're Reformed Jews, right? Obviously there's many things we value that are really contrary to clear rulings in the Torah. So how do we address that, right? Of course, from the perspective of Kabbalah, traditional Hasidus, and the Alter Rebbe, say you can't separate it all. The Torah is absolute truth. Done. You just have to follow it. I'm not sure that works for us, obviously. So how do I approach it? I say, let me see if I can take this one approach and use it for the things that matter to me. Because if it's a high-functioning approach, then let me do it as a Reformed Jew with the things that I as a Reformed Jew do. Now, am I ignoring that it says in the Torah here? Yeah. Okay, but so we're allowed to make categories. And my purpose for teaching this course is to let us as Reformed Jews do Reformed Judaism more deeply. Right? So totally acknowledge your question. When he says the Torah is God's will and wisdom, and I say, well, what about this verse? Right? That's obviously a problem. But I wouldn't want that to stand in the way of us getting the value of this psychological approach and the spiritual approach here. Because there's lots of stuff that we all agree on. Lots of stuff we say, we should be helping poor people and hungry people. We should be loving other Jews, no matter who they are, what they look like. We should be, getting together and praying and inviting any sense of God into our lives, right? So the things we all agree on. And it's those that I want to try and let us Reformed Jews take any tools we can to get deeper into.
Thank you.
כי ייחוד דיבורו מחשבתו של הקדוש ברוך הוא במהותו ועצמתו כנזכר לעיל.
For nothing is separate from God except insofar as His countenance is concealed.
Yeah, so I think we're one paragraph.
What above that?
With the unity
Oh
comparable.
boy.
That's clear.
Yeah, right?
I'm just behind the curve.
With a unity comparable to that of God's speech and thought, with His essence and being as explained above.
Let me catch up to you. כי אין שום דבר נפרד. כי בהסתר פנים כנזכר לעיל, for nothing.
For nothing is separate from God except insofar as His countenance is concealed.
And so when we do our Torah learning and our mitzvahs with this mindset, that can be our reality, that now we have this unity with God, the unity of a chariot with our physical body, the unity of a body and soul with our life force and our garments, and even the total unity of the Torah and God are completely one. when our intellect is immersing itself in this, in God's Torah. And ultimately, the only way I pop out of that is when I now go into the place where God's countenance is concealed, where God takes one of these Simpsons and says, yeah, you know, it's a puppet show, right? So you stand over there, and there's the front, and here's the puppet, and now you're in the audience, and you think the puppet is real. So when God starts concealing God's countenance, when we start saying, I'm real, you're real, the world is real, that's when now we jump out of that divine unity. As long as we're flowing and learning Torah, there's this unity that we can engage in that is above the spiritual worlds. This is exactly what it's getting to now, is the quality of unity that we're talking about and how that compares to the entire radiance of the spiritual worlds.
Moreover, their unity, i.e. the unity of the divine soul and its faculties with God that is attained through Torah study, is even more exalted and more powerful than the unity of God's infinite light with the upper spiritual world.
So isn't that, I mean, when the Baal Shem Tov had an elevation of his soul, and when these great tzaddikim would go up to heaven and talk to angels, isn't that the biggest unity? I mean, none of us could even imagine what that's like, and they have these elevations of the soul. Isn't that great? That's just the light that's coming from the Torah. Right? That's just the light that's coming from the Torah. The infinite light that is in all the spiritual worlds is just light from what we're talking about. Going on, me'achar sheratzon elyon hu bigilui mamash b'nefesh u'v'sheya v'oskim b'torah sharehu haTorah atzma.
For the divine will is actually manifest in the soul and its garments that are engaged in Torah study, since it is identical with the Torah being studied.
Right, so God's will and God's wisdom, you can't separate them. And when we engage with them, we're engaging with Ein Sof itself, not light from Ein Sof. And it's actually manifest in our soul and our garments. It's impossible to believe. We think I can't elevate myself up even to these spiritual worlds I hear about in Hasidus. And here I just think about Torah, and you're telling me now the actual divine will and wisdom is what's the word he used? Is manifest in my soul. Right? It's an incredible thing. But it's a question of almost like a self-hypnotic sense of reality, right? If you sit and you learn a little bit a day, a little bit with this in mind, something else kind of happens, and you can get to that place where that becomes your reality. Yeah, and that becomes your emotions. בכל העולמות העליונים מקבלים חיותם מאור וחיות הנמשך מן התורה שהיא רצונו וחוכמתו יתברך, כדכתיב כולם בחוכמה עשית.
All the supernova worlds receive their vitality by way of the light and life derived from the Torah, which is God's will and wisdom, as it is written. You have made them all with wisdom.
So look at this. All the worlds, so not just the physical world, but even any spiritual world, receives this vitality, right? It's being created all the time by the light and life derived from the Torah. So not the Torah itself, but just the light and life force coming off from the Torah. Right? I mean, it's far out, but remember we talked about the idea of when an author writes a story, once upon a time, and boom, the whole world is created. And what's the life force of that world? It's the ideas in the story, the character, whatever they are. Some little town somewhere, or some person somewhere. The whole world is created for that. The same thing with any spiritual world. God looked into the Torah and said, oh, okay, this is my will and wisdom. Now I need worlds to make this happen. And then the worlds appeared. That was all. Effortless. Nothing. And so any light and life that's in any of these worlds, no matter the most spiritual, is just the light and life that's flowing out of the Torah. It's not the Torah itself. It's just an external kind of flow. To make mitzvahs, there had to be a world. So fine, there's a world. So how can you compare the unity of simply the light and life coming from the Torah that is the life force of those spiritual worlds to the actual essence of God as it's united with the Torah as we're learning here? So you just hopscotch that whole thing, right? You can spend 30 years meditating and learning and trying to destroy your ego to try and get to some higher spiritual world, and that may be pleasurable. Or you could just jump right to the source and say, oh, you can't compare the life and life force in the spiritual worlds to the actual essence of God, which is united with the Torah. You have a comment? There's a comment bubbling.
This is awe-inspiring.
It is on. I find this so awe-inspiring. You want to learn a quick one. Thus it follows that.
Thus it follows. Oh, you want to?
I don't know. Thus it follows that God's wisdom, which is the Torah, transcends them all. Right? So we get hypnotized by these ideas of spiritual worlds and spiritual elevations, but sitting down and learning just some simple Torah class here at Temple Israel, that transcends any elevation any tzaddik has ever had to any spiritual state.
That's why we're here.
What?
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. There's got to be a reason. This is crazy. I love this part. Because we just, we just learned that there's nothing in the spiritual worlds that, we all of us, I'd love to have, what's Atzilus, let me have a trip there, right? There's nothing there. It's just non-existent stuff, just light from the Torah. This is the unity right here, right? And then he says, it's not just what's manifest, it's actually that it can't even come into the world. It's the encompassing light that is literally being manifest in our souls right now. So not even like the direct feeling light, but the encompassing light. It blows my mind.
In fact, the Torah, God's will, is described as encompassing all the worlds, meaning that it is at a level that cannot become clothed within the worlds, but rather animates and illuminates them as if from a distance, from above, in a transcending and encompassing manner.
Right, so the light and life force from the Torah that creates the world of Atzilus and the archangels and heaven and all this stuff, that is just a light. It's nothing compared to the unity. But it's not even that. It's that the light coming from the Torah can't even directly create those worlds. It's an encompassing light, right? It's so above even those worlds. It's like it doesn't directly create them. It just encompasses them from a distance. And it's that encompassing light that we can directly manifest when we're learning. If I understood. Oh, sorry.
And it is this level which transcends all the worlds that is clothed in the truly revealed form in one soul, and his soul garments when he studies Torah.
Right, so the will and wisdom that we're saying are one with God, they cannot relate directly to the spiritual worlds above. It's only the light from the Torah that can, and that, God's will and wisdom, it is manifest directly when we study. Our soul garments are manifesting it. So there's a whole soul fireworks show going on with this essential godliness that transcends the spiritual worlds. But here we are in a physical room looking at a physical book, so what's that about?
Even though he does not see it, in that when one studies Torah, he is unable to consciously experience the unity of his soul with God, which is attained thereby. Yet his soul feels it. In fact, this is precisely why he can endure such a unity with God, precisely because he cannot feel it. Unlike the supernatural worlds, where godliness is not obscured as it is in this world, and they cannot therefore endure such a unity with God without becoming completely nullified and losing their identities entirely.
So he brings a quote from Gemara, even though we don't see it. And we may look at that and say, well, poor us. Here we are working. We never see the results. Isn't that terrible? Don't we wish we could see it? But it's actually the reverse. The fact that we can't see it is what allows us to have that unity, right? It's not that we have this unity and too bad we can't see it. It's that thank God we can't see it so we can have this unity, because the not seeing it allows us to have the unity. right? If we were doing research on the sun, and you know, in the future we develop some way for a person to actually travel safely into the sun and take measurements and do things, obviously a key component would be to make sure they're not seeing the sun, right? Because if they saw the light that was in the sun, they'd be blinded. If they could experience the heat that was in the sun, they'd be incinerated or beyond, right? So the only way that someone could go into the sun and do measurements on its core and explore it is we made sure they had some device where they didn't see it, didn't feel it, didn't experience it at all. They're just wandering around in their sunsuit, right? It's possible, who knows? So the same thing here. There's no way any entity in the spiritual worlds, or even a soul in heaven, in our current world system, can experience directly the essence of God. You can't, because there you see the light, and you get as close as you can, and you're vibrating there, and you're kind of learning and growing in that spot, but you're stationary. You can't take quantum leaps, call it closer to it, because once you hit a level of light that's too much for you, that will end your experience of anything. You can't. So the fact that we can't see it, that's a gift, that we're all here in these spacesuits that allow us to go straight to the essence of God and just sit down and learn like it's nothing, right? And yet, we're directly encountering the very essence of the Ein Sof, not just the light. So,
Where do we buy one of these spacesuits?
exactly. First, if you can buy a time machine, you can probably buy a spacesuit. Yeah.
We've got a couple
So-
questions here.
Question. So, if I'm understanding this correctly, and I'm using my mind in this time-space continuum,
Yeah.
then God, or Ein Sof, and the Torah existed pre-creation.
Yes.
Okay.
It says in the Talmud, or Gemara, I think, God looked into the Torah and created the world. So
Okay.
what does that mean? Right? If I
What was there before?
look into a Torah to create a world, then the Torah is there before the world.
Okay.
And the Torah is the life of the world. And it's like that was the organizing principle in God's mind and with God's emotions to create the world. So, very much.
So, I hate to be so simple. So I can't see it, right?
Yeah.
I can't see it, but it's there.
It being the unity with the Ein Sof.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't see that, but it's there. And so what?
Okay, so the question is, I don't see it, but it's there, so what? So doesn't that make it irrelevant, right? If I don't see it, but I just imagine it's there, you know, do we see love,
Oh,
right? Do I see 1 + 1 = 2? I mean, I see the results of 1 + 1 = 2. I see it functioning, kind of 1 + 1 always seems to equal 2, but the actual concept, 1 + 1 = 2, can I see that? And yet it's everywhere. It applies to every time. And yet there's nowhere in time or space I can point to and say, oh, there it is, 1 + 1 = 2, right? So there's lots of things we can't see that are very real to us, and that apply and that enlighten and enliven us, right? So whether we're talking about love, which I can't see, but we all it's such a driving force, or whether we're talking about mathematical principles, which we can't see or point to, and yet, better keep that in mind if I'm building a bridge. Same thing here. Yes, I can't see it, but, you know, so what is, so that is my way of experiencing unity with God according to my tradition, which every sage has agreed with from Moshe till now. So there's a lot of weight on that side of engaging it and seeing what happens, just like I engage with math or love. Does that make
Thank
sense? Yeah.
So when
So-
the bear came on,
Let's do Joey. Yeah.
Oh, so, I mean, can we compare this to when we were at Mount Sinai and hearing God and the souls were jumping out of our bodies because it was too intense, but now we're able to be at a similar place because we don't see it or we can't feel it?
Yeah, I mean, somewhat yes, because that was God entering into reality, and then now we're experiencing God directly too. But you know that gets into what happens with the world after the time, after what we call the arrival of Mashiach traditionally, and then the whole thing changes, and God's essential light actually flows into the world, because the world is
And then we're all
a vessel for that.
Then we're all
Right, so it's different because that was a tiny taste of us experiencing this essential light directly in the world, and it happened once, and we saw the results. You know, we were still in a state where our physical bodies couldn't take it,
Right.
and our souls were really alarmed at the whole thing.
Right.
Right. So
It's
this
different.
in a way, yeah, we're experiencing that, but but you know, our physical being is not aware of it, right? Were we aware of it, then it'd probably be like Simon, you know, it'd be, you know, the words of God, who knows, right?
Okay. Right.
So it's a tricky question. I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
No, you did good.
So when the Merkava takes Elijah
Yeah,
up,
yeah.
is that like a manifestation of what this is? Like, is that a moment where we could see that unification?
Yeah, I mean, you know,
Like an
more,
allegorical kind of.
more evidently, we look at the you know the Ezekiel's chariot that he describes, and that is seen as the model, the heavenly version of the chariot we're describing here, of the patriarchs being a chariot. So that's more what's talked about, is all that really trippy, prophetic stuff that he described. I haven't seen a lot. It seems like there must be connections there, that Elijah went up in a chariot, and that's a chariot, and this is a chariot, and this is a chariot.
Yeah.
So there's always some kind of connection. I haven't read anything that I can recall that compares that chariot to things. I'd be curious to see if there is something.
It just strikes me that that's a moment of divine unity that could be seen,
Yeah.
you know, because
Yeah.
Alicia saw it, but that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, you know, if someone
Yeah.
hasn't done it, you
I mean, if it's
may want to write a little something on it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's an allegory kind of thing, maybe of that experience.
Yes, no doubt. I think you're right. I think you're right.
Did I hear you say that the Jewish history is recorded in the Torah before it happens?
Well, okay, I mean, this is a little further afield. Okay, but let's fill it quickly and then get back to the text. So the question was, did I hear you say that all of Jewish history is recorded in the Torah before it happened? Right. So I can chunk up a few from there. When God had God's first thought about creating the world, all possible realities were included in that one thought. So the idea that anything could happen that's not included in God's thought, that's not a Jewish idea, right? God thought world, and boom, that was every possible spiritual, physical world, every possible decision, every possible emotion, every possible scenario. That's God's one infinite thought, which encompasses all of reality.
So he anticipates all the stuff that we do.
Everything, right? Everything. And that all is included in the Torah, of course. So when we got that spark of Torah, that was God having that one thought about the world with God's opinion about how it should work out. So that's God saying, yeah, I want people to be kind. I want people to be loving. That's included. And yes, God has the capacity in that one thought to grasp and understand every possible scenario that will ever happen through history, where one Jew and another Jew will be loving to each other and not be loving. It's all included. So you're dealing with infinite intellect. We can't conceive of it. But the answer is yes. So all of history, it was definitely included in the transmission at Sinai.
So God knew that the Holocaust was going to happen.
Oh, okay. But yes, even that. So even though that's something we can't possibly grapple with morally, we can still say, yes, God knows, and yes, there's a purpose that I will never understand. Yeah.
Me too.
Me too. Good. Yeah.
You have to take that one.
Yeah.
ובזה יובן למה גדלה מאוד מעלת העסק בתורה יותר מכל המצוות, אפילו מתפילה שהיא ייחוד עולמות עליונים.
This discussion of the exalted unity with God attained through Torah study, which is even greater than they accomplished by performing the mitzvot, explained why Torah study is so much loftier than any other commandments, including even prayer, which effects unity with its supernal worlds.
And so now he's saying that's why Torah study is considered all the other commandments combined and so much loftier. And now we come to, he has to parry a few arguments, because all of us Gemara students in the room are saying, but hold on, isn't it true that if you are learning Torah, you have to get up to pray when it comes time to prayer? So doesn't that mean that prayer is more important than Torah, right? So, what do you know, Alter Rebbe, right? So he's got that obvious argument he's got to counter here. והד מי שאין תורתו אמונתו צריך להפסיק, היינו אחד מפסיק ומבטל בלאו הכי.
Although the law requires of anyone whose Torah study is not his entire occupation, that he interrupt his study for prayer, which would seem to indicate that prayer surpasses Torah study. This is so only because he would in any case pause and interrupt his studies.
And so this is from Shabbat in Gemara, and he's pointing out, if you are a full-time Torah student who is learning Torah 18 hours a day and just that's all you do, actually halachically you're not required to interrupt for prayer. And there were many sages in history who actually only prayed on occasion because they just learned Torah all the time. They're not halakhically required to interrupt it.
Are they allowed to eat?
Yeah, eat, but don't eat so that you can learn more Torah, right? If you're getting up and you're like, I got a meal, I love, the hot chocolate and the chicken and the this and the that, whatever it is, right? Now you've interrupted your Torah study. Now you're not a full-time Torah student. But if you're learning, it's like, I have to put this Gemara down and just eat enough so I have energy to get back to it, and every bite is just more fuel so you can go back and learn Torah, then that kind of person doesn't have to stop.
And the calls of nature are permitted.
Calls of nature are permitted, that's what it is. All those. And a little bit of sleep. Yeah. So for normal people for whom that's not their full-time occupation, it's not the case. And they do have to interrupt. And the thinking was that once you have to interrupt at some point, if you're gonna ever stop learning Torah, now it's just a question of when you're interrupting. Right? So someone that never truly interrupts, they're only taking breaks to get back. They don't have to pray. But somebody that's going to do something else, okay, now you are going to interrupt it. So now it's just a question of, are you going to interrupt it on God's schedule, your schedule, so to speak? Right? So when it's time for Kabbalah Shabbat, now you put the Torah down, you go, and you're actually required to. So just a little halachic tidy up there. Mizeh yuchal hamaskil lamshich alav yira gdola v'askot Torah.
From this explanation of lofty stature of Torah study, the wise man will be able to draw upon himself a sense of great awe as he engages in the study of the Torah.
So this for me is the take home. It's nice to learn this stuff. It's nice to, kind of stick my brain into that worldview where, this is total unity with the Ein Sof that's above even the heavenly realms. But it only matters if then when I get home and I decide I'm going to review something or open something up, now I feel something different. So that's a sense of awe. It's like this is not a board game. This is Jumanji, right? And you hear the boom, 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 boom in the background. You're like, there's a whole world in there. You get sucked in, right? You get a sense of awe rolling the dice in that Jumanji game. If you've seen the movie, I saw it with my kids, right? So lahavdil, this is actually God, but people that really for him this is reality. When they open this up, there's really a sense of awe. Am I having proper thoughts? Am I behaving in a dignified way? Am I approaching this seriously, like I'm picking up the phone and talking to some great, movie star, politician, whomever? Like, whoa, I'm watching my words. So the whole point of this is to understand how divine unity works according to Kabbalah, so that I have a deeper sense of awe when I'm learning. I'm recognizing what's happening in my soul. כשיתבונן איך שנפשו לבושיה שבמוחו ובפיו הם מיוחדים ממש, ותחת ייחוד ברצון עליון ואור אינסוף ברוך הוא ממש מתגלה בהם.
When he considers how his soul and its garments of thought and speech that are found in his brain and mouth are truly fused in perfect unity with the divine will and the infinite light of the Ein Sof that is manifest in them, that is, in the soul and its garments when he studies Torah.
And when he says mamash, he's getting serious. Mamash means literally. So, he's telling us, this is not some metaphor to inspire you. This is actually, if you could see from the eyes of your soul, this is literally what's happening. And he uses it not once, but twice, right? Twice in this. That the garments of thought and speech in our brain and mouth are truly, literally fused in perfect unity when we learn Torah. Ma shekol alamot elonim v'tachtonim כלה חשיבי כמה וכעין ואפס ממש, עד שאינו מתלבש בתוכם ממש, אלא סובב כל מין בבחינת מקיף. אחריותם, עיקר אחריותם רק איזו הערה מתלבשת בתוכם, מה שיכולים לסבול שלא יתבטלו במציאות לגמרי.
This infinite light manifest in one's Torah study is of such a lofty level that all the upper and lower worlds are truly as naught in comparison with it, and are in fact as absolutely nothing at all. So much so that they can only bear to have a minute glow of it clothed in them without their reverting to nothingness altogether. Their main life force, which they receive from it, however, is not clothed within them, but animates them from the outside, so to speak, in a transcendent, encompassing manner.
Kind of going deeper into what we described, that this light and life force, this divine will that's fused in perfect unity with us, the higher worlds can only receive a little reflection of it, right? We're getting directly the essence of the divine intellect and wisdom and will, and the upper worlds are just getting, a little one mirror catching one ray, and that's creating the whole world. That's how transcendent this reception is. וזה שכתוב, ויצווינו השם את כל החוקים האלה ליראה את השם וגומר.
This is the meaning of the verse, and God commanded us to fulfill all these statutes in order to fear God.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a whole, and we've been framing this a lot in terms of love and the avat misiteret, but the Alter Rebbe said also, and how fear is included. So obviously, when I'm walking into, the Supreme Court, and I'm looking at the judges who will decide something about my life, I'm filled with a sense of dread. I know this is it. There's nothing higher than this in the country, and what they say goes, and I've got a certain respect for that. And so the same thing potentially can happen when I open any book of Torah, that I recognize what unity I'm experiencing, and I have that same sense of respect, what we call fear, and many levels of fear that are there for me to try and grasp.
Does he mean awe when he says fear? It's the same word.
Lira, yeah, awe.
So
Yeah.
if you substitute awe,
Awe is generally at a higher level of fear.
yeah.
Yeah, but fear too, right? I mean, if I say, I feel like robbing a bank today, well, I probably need some fear for that, right? But if I'm saying, well, how do I get beyond my ego? Now maybe there's a more mature sense of awe where I'm just, when I recognize the reality of divine oneness, as the Alter Rebbe is saying, I have a sense of shame and embarrassment that I care so much about myself, that I create this entity called me, and I put that in front of my eyes, and I block my view of my own source, right? So it's more like a sense of awe of the greatness of our spiritual source, and it's more a sense of kind of
I think it's like respect is involved in that.
Yeah, respect.
And so you're,
it's all those. There's many
Yeah.
levels as we learn.
yeah.
Ve'al yira gdola zo, on this great level of awe, im ein chochma ein yira, v'Torah nikret etzla tar'a dedarta, k'mo shenitba'er b'makom acher.
Regarding this great fear, our sages said, if there is no wisdom, there is no fear. In this context, wisdom represents Torah study, and fear, the higher level of the awe of God, which can be reached only by way of the Torah. By contrast, the statement, if there is no fear, there is no wisdom, refers to the lower level of fear, which is a prerequisite for Torah study, as stated above. In relation to this level of fear, the Torah is called a gateway to the dwelling. That is, the sole means of entering the dwelling, which is the higher level of fear, as is explained elsewhere.
And so that, we could do a whole month on this page here, right? So there's in Pirkei Avot it says, if I'm correct, I don't know the order. If there's no fear, there's no wisdom. If there's no wisdom, there's no fear. So either in one or both, I forget. But both are true because there's two levels of fear. There's actually many grades of fear, right? So the lower level of fear is, you teach your kids, don't hit your friends because God doesn't want that, and you get punished, right? And the kid imagines, I don't want God to spank me or give me a timeout or take my iPhone away, so I'm not going to hit my friends. And that's a child level of fear that's appropriate for a child. So it's that kind of fear that will get a child to sit down and start learning what it means to be a good person, what it means to be Jewish, and they'll develop wisdom out of that lower level of fear. But as we mature, as we get older, now that wisdom, which we're calling here the gateway to the dwelling, that allows us to experience the if there's no wisdom, there's no fear version of fear. And that's a higher level of fear, which is more like perhaps awe, or more like this bullshit, this shame of really recognizing the greatness of the Creator compared to my standing and where I am. But it's a complex thing where one leads to the other and the other leads back to the one, because there's two levels of fear. Or more than two. Ela delav kol mocha savilda yira kazo. Av gam man dela savil mocho klal yira zo lo mina velo miktsata yipnei pchitut erech nafsho. Shosha mikora b'madregot tachtonot deser sefirot dasia ein yira zo me'akevet bo l'maseh kmo shitba'er l'kaman.
Not every mind, however, can sustain such a fear. Yet even he whose mind cannot bear such a fear, or even a minute minute part of it, because the root and source of his soul derives from an inferior level, the lower gradations of the 10 sefirot of the world of Asiya, even he should not be deterred from the actual performance of the Torah and the mitzvot for want of this fear, as will be explained further.
Yeah, so in 41, we're going to get to, okay, well, so what if I'm not experiencing this? What's the point? If I'm a more common soul and I'm not experiencing these levels, then is there any benefit? And he explains more fully there, but here he wants to make sure no one comes away from this chapter thinking, well, if I don't consciously experience this love and this fear, then why bother learning Torah? He says, no, there's always a benefit, rest assured. So hold on to this kind of feeling. It's a beautiful chapter. Next chapter is a little bit harsh, because next chapter we go into the flip side of not divine unity, but idol worship. And where here we learn that every mitzvah, every line of Torah that we learn is actually this intense unity with God that is beyond the higher realms. In the next chapter, we'll look at the opposite. Every Avera, unfortunately, tears away from God the same way idol worship does. So just maybe bring a glass of red wine. Let's just take one moment to touch on our first path, the longshore path. Let's bring our breathing to a nice, slow, even state. Let your belly move out with every in-breath and back in with every out-breath. Like a big balloon. As you even out your breath, let's open up our wisdom gateway, which is that pause between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. Let's fill that gateway with this wisdom from the Zohar. The Torah and God are entirely one. Ancient wisdom. Let your mind fill with that divine concept. As we speak about this Torah text, as we think about it, or struggle with it, our soul is experiencing this complete unity with the essence of God above the spiritual worlds. Perhaps just let your mind wander through that divine concept and let any details fill your mind with great color, great movement, great light, great joy. If you're at home, feel free to stay here for any amount of time, but time in the class is up, so just wiggle your toes and open your eyes. Wish you all a very beautiful Hey Tavis. Hang around and explain what that is if anybody's curious. And beautiful stuff. We'll see you next week when we'll start chapter 24.